Good morning, dear ones, and welcome to Unity Church. A very special welcome to those of you who are visiting us today. This morning, we tune in from our singular rooms to join together in worship. Welcome to this time we set aside each week to help us find and keep our balance, to think about those things that matter most, to root out racism in ourselves and in the world, and to align ourselves and our lives to integrity, service, and joy. Here in the sanctuary, your worship leaders gather, taking appropriate precautions, learning as we lead, to offer clarity, comfort, and inspiration in these trying times. We know that nothing can replace the face-to-face, hand-in-hand voices raised in song that embodied worship can bring. We also know that the ministry we share has never been about a building. This church is not closed. After the service, whether this is your first time with us or your 101st time, you are invited to participate in a virtual Zoom coffee hour where we share a bit of our lives with each other and get to know one another more deeply. Stay for a few minutes just to say hi, or stay up to 45 minutes to connect in smaller breakout rooms. Information about how to participate is available on Unity's homepage, and the link to coffee hour will be shared at the end of this service. If you would like to learn more about Unity Church and Unitarian Universalism, we invite you to participate in Finding Yourself at Unity today at 1 p.m. The topic of today's one-hour online offering is religious education for children, youth, and adults. Information is on our homepage, or email lisa@unityunitarian.org to get connected to this class happening today at 1 p.m. We hope you will join us to celebrate Reverend Lisa Friedman's ministry with Unity Church on Saturday, June 13th from 2 to 4 p.m. Details, including how to register for this online event and where to send a note of gratitude for Lisa's ministry, are on our homepage and will be sent via email this week. Next Sunday, during a service titled All Blessings Flow, Reverend Rob Eller-Isaacs will speak to the reality in blessing and how we prepare ourselves to bless and be blessed. The service will also include our high school senior bridging celebration. In the coming days and weeks, we will continue to find new ways to come together for worship, for learning, for deep connection, for justice, and for love. Welcome, and stay tuned.
Good morning. I have always been proud to be an American. I got a little more proud when Lin-Manuel Miranda boiled down our founding fathers' history into a beautiful, skillful theater production, but still, I always knew I was proud to be an American. I was even more so 2 summers ago when we did a 5 national park tour, first starting at Theodore Roosevelt and winding through Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. The majesty and the forethought to preserve this area for all to enjoy for generations to come was a thing of vision, which is why it was so disappointing by ending our trip at Mount Rushmore. Seems like a thing you have to see, But knowing the land was so striking before, and we used our amazing engineering skills to carve presidents' heads onto it, 2 of whom were slave owners, 1 of whom ordered the mass execution of Native people, and another who was a warmonger. It strikes me as the perfect example of the mixed blessings we have as Americans and as a country. We can know our greatness, but we can also destroy it. When I was handed my undergraduate degree, they say, "We give this to you with all the privilege and burden that it bestows." And so I take my country, the mixed blessing, loving it, and knowing we can and must do better. Come, let us worship together. Please join me in reading responsively. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edge of decisions, crucial and alone.
For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice.
Who love in doorways coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward, at once, before and after.
Seeking a now that can breed futures, like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the depth of ours.
For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk.
But by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us.
For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive.
And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain.
When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning.
When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion.
When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again.
When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish.
When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return.
And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed.
But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we will never meant to survive. We invite you into a moment of silent reflection and prayer.
Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. Together, we recognize the cycle of life and death, the circle of love, compassion, and witness that is at the center of this and every sacred community. We stand at the side of all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children, with those who live with grief or chronic pain, with illnesses seen and unseen, with mental illness and addiction. We pray for our neighbors in prison, for those who care for family members in ill health, and those who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty. Our lives are blessed by those who knowingly and with curiosity and courage face their final days, and by those who rise above heartbreak to carry on the work of ending oppression in all its forms. We pray for those in harm's way, for the wisdom and strength of the leaders of the world and for the leaders of this beloved congregation as together we live into our future. Will you pray with me now for these we name? We hold Michelle and Dave Sylvester and their sons Andrew and Nicholas as they grieve the death of Michelle's beloved Uncle Mervyn Monkholm, who died suddenly on Thursday. His generosity, kindness, and sense of humor will be deeply missed. Michelle also notes that her Uncle Mervyn was a strong support and caregiver for his daughter, Kim Burroughs, as she has wrestled with cancer. So we also hold Kim in our prayers as she coordinates arrangements for the family and gathers the extended family in the memory of her father. And we send our hearty congratulations to Hope Barker and Dan Hilster, who are celebrating their 40th anniversary this week. I now invite you to speak aloud the names of those you have brought here with you in your hearts today. May we stand in compassionate solidarity with our neighbors all around the world who suffer in the midst of habitual violence. May they and may we be instruments of a lasting peace. And let us pray. Holy One, source of all being and promise of all our becoming, we gather today on the threshold of change that has been far too long in coming. We gather, each of us, with our own particular mix of grief and anger, fear and anxiety, courage and confusion, hope and despair. And we gather, all of us, with a shared longing to finally become a people, a nation, a world that both promises and delivers justice for all. We pray today that the pain and suffering, the terror and the trembling of this threshold time will not be wasted, but rather it will be redeemed with a blessing potent enough to call this longed-for justice into being. Let this be the blessing that comes. May our grief keep our hearts open to one another, to ourselves, and to the truth of our past and present and the possibilities of our future. May our rage neither divide us nor distract us from the true tasks at hand. May our fears, anxieties, and confusion not hold us back from work that is ours to do in our hearts, in our streets, in our relationships, and in our systems. May our hope not be false and our despair not let us retreat from feeling the trembling of this time. May this trembling discomfort of this moment be known for what it is, a fearful and powerful invitation to let go of the world and life we've known and to become our whole and best and beautiful selves, each of us guided and graced by a love that holds us all. May it be so, and amen.
The memorial site at the intersection of 38th Street and Chicago Avenue South is sacred ground. In a 30-feet circle, people have brought flowers, people have brought photographs and messages, and you can see the artwork and the writing weaving here and out in the circle that the community has constructed as sacred ground. And people have been coming to mourn, to keep vigil, to protest, to come together and be in conversation. But people have been coming with a greater representation of the cross-section that is our nation, with more coalitions of organizations coming together to be at this sacred site, to be at this intersection. And as I watch that circle of people coming and going, and artwork and photos, weaving in and out and connecting, in my heart, it reminded me of the rounded webs made by spiders, with designs that are so beautiful, made by these spiders that are called orb weavers. And I began to wonder, how is it that these orb weavers, mostly blind animals, how is it that they can create such beautiful and complex webs and designs in settings that are changing and unpredictable, with winds blowing and weathers constantly damaging that design? I thought about these orb weavers and the wisdom that they may have for us. So for the children who are joining this morning, as you are able, come a little closer to your screens. Come a little closer and join me for this story. I listened to a scientist who studies these spiders called orb weavers. I listened to a scientist who describes walking into a meadow, a field, each morning, and he carries an old sock, and inside the old sock, cornstarch. And he's looking for webs, strands made by orb weavers. Sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of silken threads. And when he catches sunlight reflecting off of one or two, he opens his sock and he scatters cornstarch. And with the help of gravity and a gentle breeze, in that blanket is revealed orbs. These spiral, wheel-shaped webs with such astonishing beauty. And then he moves and he goes to work. And with eyes and ears that have been practiced over the years, he reminds us that the hardest thing is not for eyes that see and move really quickly at things that they see over there. The hardest thing is to be disciplined to see what is closest to us. And as he looks, he moves in millimeters, moving with such respect and humility, so that as he gets closer to these orbs, to do no violence, to bring no harm. And he says, so you want to know how these orb weavers, mostly blind animals, how it is that they can create such beautiful and complex designs in changing and unpredictable environments? You want to know? It's because these orb weavers have a knack for seeing and understanding their environment. They know how to look. They know how to ask, how much web do I have? How big is this space? What are the points that need to be connected and bridged together? They are experts at understanding their environment. And they begin with a drag line, because they drag it with them. It's their safety line, and they weave that drag line. And then they look at opposite places in the space, and almost like the geometry of a star, they move and they connect and they bring opposite sides into connection. And then they go to the hub right there in the middle, and then they weave spokes out to the outer frame, strengthening these connections. And then they go back to the hub and they start to spiral. Circles bigger and bigger, ranging from the hub all the way to the outer frame. And then finally, they do something that I think is astounding. They look for the gaps. And these orb weavers weave elastic threads that have beads. Beads that are like dental floss dispensers, so that when something hard comes and it might damage and stretch the web too far, like a dental floss dispenser, these beads dispense extra threads. So the web absorbs and stretches, is flexible, and does not break. Elasticity as resilience. This whole process, says the scientist, is about the wisdom of orb weavers, of bringing opposite points, bridging them together, and creating intersections. Intersections at the 38th Street and Chicago Avenue South. Intersections in our neighborhoods. Intersections online in Zoom sessions. Intersections everywhere in Washington, D.C. Intersections in our minds and in our hearts. Intersections that call all of us as a nation and world together and ask, what are the threads that we can weave to bridge us as a community of resilience and to reimagine the design of this project called America? This is the wisdom and the call of orb weavers who invite us into the weaving. May it be so. Amen.
We are, all of us, living in threshold times. If that was not abundantly clear when the pandemic broke out months ago, it is now a fact blazing before our eyes here in the Twin Cities and around the nation and the world. We are precariously balanced on a cusp between what is no longer and what is not yet. A threshold being a point of transition or passage from a familiar place or time or way of being into another, full of unknowns. Thresholds can arouse our fears as we pass through significant change. They can also spark great vitality as times of encounter, exchange, and dynamic growth. Thresholds are intersections. For the past 6 years here at Unity Church, we have annually offered a Thresholds group as an opportunity for church members and other thresholders to accompany one another in such times of significant personal change. For the people participating in this group, some of their thresholds are chosen and many are not. Some are desired, many wholly unwanted. Their particulars are unique, and each person must determine how best to cross their threshold, where to find the wisdom, the courage, and the guidance they need. But there are many points of connection in the group too, as evidenced by an abundance of laughter and tears of encouragement and compassion that have been shared by these thresholders over the past 2 months. Together, they have discovered crossing thresholds is daunting and difficult. It can be frightening, overwhelming, and confusing. There are losses and grief as well as gifts and excitement. Always, there will be portions of the journey that can only be made alone. But always, too, there will be companions whose presence and witness, whose kindness and wisdom will mean that even the solitary path need not be lonely and need not bring despair. These are the characteristics of life on the threshold, which in addition to all of that is sacred, alive with new possibilities, and a chance to practice letting go, mustering courage and curiosity, finding wisdom, and fostering a larger love that abides even and especially on the greatest of divides. This is the sacred and significant work this year's Thresholds group has been doing over the past 2 months. This is the work that I ask you to now join me in blessing. Ordinarily, we would have the Threshold group standing here on the chancel with me. I ask you to imagine them standing before you. As I read the names of this year's group, you will likely not know the particulars of their thresholds, and you won't need to in order to bless them and stand by them through this passage in their life. They are Heather Benedict, Kate Buckley, Lisa Burke, Teresa Isley, Ruth Gramza, Tracy Gulliver, Priscilla McDougall, Forrest Mainville, Barbara Nelson, and Joe Shore. Please join me now as you hold these people in your heart, reading responsively the words on your screen, blessing this group, as well as every one of us also living on the threshold. And if you yourself are especially feeling the trembling dynamic of our shared thresholds today, or if you are on a personal threshold of your own, please feel free to silently receive this blessing, listening as the rest of us speak it to you. Please rise and join me in this blessing. For all those standing on a threshold about to step into the unknown, we are standing with you. Although we may not know the particulars of this threshold, which is uniquely yours, we offer you our hands for steadiness on our path, our compassionate ears to hear your hopes and fears, and our open hearts to share the joys and sorrows of your passage, spoken and unspoken. As you step toward the uncertainty of all that is unfolding, we remind you of the love that holds you certain and true. May your own inner light guide you, and may you learn to trust that light, even when it does not shine very far down the road. If your light begins to flicker and fade, we will offer sparks to reignite it. May your heart remain open to grieve what you are leaving and to receive the gifts that will come your way in this crossing. May you be blessed by courage to keep stepping into the life that awaits you. May you be blessed by compassion, especially for yourself. May this passage bring you new discoveries and renewed faith, and offer you a gateway to ancient wisdom and healing wholeness. May you always remember the pledge of this community, extending hand and heart open to you in all that is to come. Though our ministry is now largely online, the church's financial obligations continue. Your support of the church is an expression of the promises we make to one another and to the world. We know that some of you have had your hours reduced and that some of you are furloughed or have lost your job. Please let us know if you are facing financial difficulty. We are here to help. But don't let fear undermine your commitment to the ministry we share. Please do your best to be generous with the church so that the church can, in turn, maintain our staff and programs and keep our promises to the many community partners that our Sunday offerings support. Today, the larger portion of our offering will support the work of Project Minnesota, the only independent, state-based, grassroots gun violence prevention organization in the nation. A community partner of Unity's Gun Sense ministry team, Project Minnesota promotes a culture of safety for all Minnesotans by preventing gun violence through research, education, advocacy, and community investment. And it advocates from a unique position that lends legitimacy and relevance to the call for sensible gun laws in Minnesota. During the offering interlude, please visit Unity's homepage and follow the link in the Sunday service section to make your donation. You can also use the Give function located in our Shelby Next membership app and online database, or the good old-fashioned mail a check to the church. Thank you for your generous donations.
From local poet Ed Bach Lee's new collection, this poem assembles quotes from his mother, Hyung Lee, who currently lives in the United States, and whose history the poet describes in his book notes with these words. Ethnically Korean, she was born in China, where her family lived until, when she was very young, they were forced to flee during the Second Sino-Japanese War. Then, once again, during the Pacific War. Eventually, they resettled a third time in what is now commonly known as North Korea, near where her parents had been born. But then again, as refugees, were uprooted during the Korean War, fleeing this time to the recently created and soon to be militarized, contested over South Korea. It's easy to love when you haven't lost everything, my mother would never say. Instead, I don't need to text. We think we're not sliding into evil like a ship over the horizon to those on deck, she's only intimated. But very clearly this, take your daughter to church in a language she doesn't understand. Let her feel the others singing, then let her decide for herself. And this one, though not to me, and not in English, North and South Korea are like lobes of the brain. Both will fall into mistrust of one another for periods, then reconcile, then fight again. It has to do with a longer history than anyone understands. Like running requires a fleeting moment of disequilibrium, then a burst of faith, and so on. You can cover much more ground this way than walking. Ideology is a flag with stolen, fraying wings and garish colors sewn on, she whispers after a sip of barley tea for her eyesight. Hope is only truly useful when it's deeply buried blue.
Last week in Minneapolis, I joined several hundred colleagues of many faiths and theologies in a silent march organized by Black clergy from the Twin Cities and throughout Minnesota, actually. We walked in solemn silence, whites following the Black leaders east down 38th Street to Chicago Avenue. And there we passed through the intersection that KP just described to the place just steps away where George Floyd was murdered almost 2 weeks ago today. You've likely seen this now in person or in photos, this intersection with its newly drawn circle mandala, transformed by sidewalk chalk and flowers, by art and grief, by all-night vigils and a steady stream of pilgrims, paying tribute on foot, on bikes, and on bended knee. Which is what we did that day too, dropped to our knees together on what was so clearly sacred ground. Hundreds of us, Black and white of many faiths, knees surrendered to the summer-scorched pavement, heads bowed, tears running into our face masks as the Black clergy led us in reciting the Lord's Prayer right there. Never have I heard those words as profoundly and tearfully as I did that day on my knees in the very site where another knee bent in an act of terror took George Floyd's life. Today, as we at Unity Church turn our focus toward the monthly theme of blessing, I am reminded that the Hebrew and Arabic words for blessing can be traced to the word for knee. Meaning, as I understand it, that to bless a person or a place, an occasion or a space is to offer a gift in words or deed on bended knee, in humility, in relationship. Right there in the noisy, busy intersections where our faith meets the heat of the world and where the traffic merges sometimes dangerously, the traffic of grief and anger, loss and renewal, life and death, hope and despair, all of this in motion, coming and going, all mixed up together, creating commotion here in this time of terrifying contradictions, heartbreaking losses, and staggering possibilities for justice, both rising from the terrible events of this time. If there are blessings to be named now, friends, and I believe there are many, surely it is a time of mixed blessings. Such is the nature of many significant thresholds. Those dynamic times of change in our lives, whether personally or collectively, that mark a passage from what is no longer to what is not yet. Thresholds are doorways in time, places in between, where we are asked to let go and leave something behind, often without knowing what will replace it or when. A threshold is a place of much trembling and great uncertainty. No wonder it is also a place begging for the gift and power of blessing. But just what is blessing? And what does it do? And who is empowered to do it? There is a difference, maybe subtle but true, between prayer and blessing. Prayer, we sometimes say, is a quality of listening, a posture of attention opened to the present moment and to the sacredness nested within every moment. Blessing, you might say, grows from prayer's posture, and it leans forward. When a blessing is offered on a threshold, it opens our heart's attention to that space in between, and then it inclines us, maybe even calls us or nudges us, beckons us across to the other side into a new reality as yet wholly unseen and unknown. This is why blessing is an act of faith. The poet John O'Donohue wrote that a blessing is a circle of light drawn around a person to protect, heal, and strengthen. He said, quote, "To be in the world is to be distant from the homeland of wholeness. We are confined by limitation and difficulty. When we bless," he said, "we are enabled somehow to go beyond our present frontiers and reach into the source. A blessing," he said, "awakens future wholeness." When a blessing draws a circle of light around us, it illuminates the ground beneath our feet. Always, always the only place to begin a journey into the unknown, whether it is a journey of 1,000 miles or 1,000 demands for justice deferred throughout centuries of oppression. A blessing takes the past into account and draws the circle wider to include a future of something new and different, evoking wholeness. It steadies us. Naming a new reality, it inspires and calls us. It opens a wide intersection where contradictions can meet with the necessary tension and discomfort that accompanies growth. But sometimes, with enough mutual attention and effort, those contradictions can meet and pass without collision. The threshold times we are in right now have been rife with collisions. Clashes like flint on stone, igniting fires in our cities throughout the night, as well as sparking fires in hearts and minds that burn with anger all day long. We have seen the destruction fire brings. Buildings reduced to rubble and twisted rebar, street lamps and street side trees scorched into mere shadows. But let us not forget that fire also brings light. And each time we light our chalices, as we did this morning, we are blessing the time and space we share by evoking the light of truth and the warmth of love that rise from this community where we are in covenant to walk with one another and many others beyond us. I wonder, can our chalice lighting practice be of use in blessing the uncertain future awaiting us now? In a world ablaze with hatred, can we tend a different kind of fire? With flames of love and true connection, making a circle of light that gathers us and helps us move forward? Some of you know I have a deep fear of fire. It began when I was 7 years old and fell hands first into the hot coals of a campfire, burning both hands badly. The healing took all summer. My fear of fire lasted much longer, keeping me from lighting a match until well into my teenage years. Still, I was drawn to the heat and shimmer of fire. And so I became a fire tender. I learned to make my fires by saving and recovering the smallest embers of fires abandoned by others as ashes. Every summer when our family went camping, I was often the first to rise on the cold northern mornings, and I would wish for the warmth of a fire. Unable to light a match, for fear of bringing my fingers that close to the flame, I would instead use a long stick, gently poking through the ashes in the fire pit until I found a single ember still alive from the previous night's fire. And then I would feed it carefully, first with pine needles, small twigs, my own measured breath, then with larger sticks and branches, eventually a small log. Most mornings, by the time my family rose, I had a small campfire burning safely within the circle of stones and releasing its warmth and light beyond. In the past 2 weeks, perhaps you too have felt a variation of this dilemma, wanting to be part of kindling warmth and light, but also holding back in fear, not only of the fires burning in the street, but also of the virus spreading with our breath. How do we live out our faith and values when these contradictions create such confusion? We don't know what to do or where to turn sometimes. Blessing this confusion, this chaos, the contradictions we live with our own spoken commitment to lean toward justice, is a good place to begin. If you want to discover the mixed blessings of this time, look for the embers of hope still alive in the ashes and offer them your breath. The breath of commitment, measured but strong. As you do, you will be creating a small but growing circle of light and warmth for yourself and others. Start where you are. Use what you have. Do what you can. There is work enough for all of us to find our part, large or small. Last week, 80 of you gathered in a very full Zoom room to name just some of the work that needs to be done on this threshold of justice-seeking change. We found no shortage of tasks. We named work to be done on the streets as well as work to be done in our hearts and minds and in our homes and neighborhoods. There is something for every one of us, friends. Blessing gets its power from the way our breath and breathing connects us to one another and to all living beings, just like that web KP described. A blessing gets its power from relationship, right relationship, equitable relationship. A blessing, wrote Rachel Naomi Remen, is a moment of meeting, a certain kind of relationship in which both people involved remember and acknowledge their true nature and worth and strengthen what is whole in one another. When we bless, she said, we touch the unborn goodness in them and wish it well. Have you been blessing the people you meet each day like this? In Audre Lorde's Litany for Survival that we read together this morning, she names the true worth of those who have been devalued and oppressed. And she writes this poem for all of these, calling out to those who were never meant to survive in systems that deny their humanity and very existence. She also names the fear in every one of us, inscribed there to keep the systems of oppression in place. She sees us, names us. There, quote, in the doorways coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward at once before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths. With this poem, she is blessing all of us on the threshold of this time, breeding hope with her words and calling upon us to do the same with ours. Audre Lorde knew a few things herself about contradictions and mixed blessings. When she was named New York's Poet Laureate in 1991, a position that she held until she died of cancer a year later, she said this: "What does it mean that a Black, lesbian, feminist, warrior, poet, mother is named the State Poet of New York? It means," she said, "that we live in a world full of the most intense contradictions, and we must find ways to use the best we have, ourselves, our work, to bridge those contradictions, to learn the lessons that those contradictions teach." She said, "And that is the work of the poet within each one of us, to envision what has not yet been, and to work with every fiber of who we are to make the pursuit of those visions irresistible." If this is the work of poetry, friends, I would add it is also the work of blessings. And it is the power within each one of us to bless the contradictions of our times, which is to say, to look with open eyes and honest acknowledgement at the injustices that built this nation, and to call into being a vision for justice we have never known and never seen, to draw a circle of light that big, that bright, that warm. In the rapid movement of change occurring in our cities and our lives today, it's easy to let fear silence us and shut us down. Can we learn instead to run with it? The poet Ed Bach-Lee describes the act of running this way, as alternating between moments of disequilibrium and a burst of faith. "You can cover more ground that way than walking," says the poet's mother. "You can move through, quote, a history longer than anyone understands. You can feel your way to faith. As you listen to the singing, you can discover the only truly useful hope, beneath and beyond ideology, deeply buried blue." So emboldened by our faith, let us find the hope deeply buried blue in this moment. May we create a circle of light that beckons us and others through and across these threshold times into a future unknown but alive with the promise of true justice, of new understanding, of right and deep relationship with one another. May we all accept this invitation to become orb weavers, spinning a new web of justice and of love. May it be so, and amen. Friends, fear not. May we receive the blessing of this time with all of its trembling as an invitation into love, a call to love and be loved, to create a circle of light that is large enough and warm enough and light enough to embrace us all in the love that we know as justice. Let us accept that call, receive that blessing, and share it with others. Go in peace.